The effect that is actually varies based on what action Mario's doing. So let's go through the different actions. First, if Mario's on the ground, then the ceiling hitbox cancels his movement. So you can see that as Mario tries to hitbox, his movement gets cancelled, which prevents him from entering the ceiling hitbox. And he also does the pushing animation when this happens. Here's what that looks like in the game. So note that even though Mario's 160 units below the ceiling triangle, it basically looks like his head is touching the ceiling because his model is just under 160 units tall. Second, if Mario's in the air and tries to enter a ceiling hitbox, then what happens depends on whether he's moving upwards or downwards. If he enters a ceiling hitbox while moving upwards, then his movement gets cancelled and his vertical speed gets set to 0. This cuts short his upwards trajectory, since from that point on, he'll start moving downwards due to gravity. I mean, gravity gets applied every frame you're in the air, but in these visuals, I'm simplifying things and only applying it when it's relevant to the point I'm making. So here's jumping up into a ceiling in the game. It cuts short Mario's upwards movement, and then he falls down afterwards. On the other hand, if he enters a ceiling hitbox while moving downwards, then only the horizontal component of his movement is cancelled, so it just does the vertical component, just moving straight home. The ceilings aren't going to cancel the whole movement, that would let you hover in the air, and I have a hunch the programmers didn't want that. So here's what falling into a ceiling looks like in the game. Cancels Mario's horizontal movement to prevent him from going inside the ceiling hitbox, so he still falls down. And third, if Mario's in water, then the ceiling hitbox doesn't cancel his movement, but instead brings him down to the bottom of the ceiling hitbox. So we can see that as Mario enters the hitbox, he gets snapped down. Here's what that looks like in the game. Mario snaps down as soon as he enters the ceiling hitbox. And if the ceiling is at equal, then Mario snaps down each time he moves forwards. So for example, if I swim into the ship, I get
Sign here, please! I'm out of here! Incoming! Nowhere to hide! Yeah! Ninjutsu!
As you wish, Maple.
Speed of light! Cut to the chase! By royal decree! Send that me! Send me my smile! Coming through!
And if you try to exit upwards, the ceiling cancels your movement and cuts short your upwards trajectory. So in this case, the room keeps you inside, and so you'd never normally be all the way up here interacting with the upper ceiling hitbox. And then piece 2, so it goes to structure. Box. So the hitboxes look like this.
An instructor.
Now, I said
God damn it.
extend infinitely upwards.
It's stuck.
They do in isolation. As you see, when it's up above the ceiling, then the ceiling hitbox only extends upwards until it meets the floor hitbox. So you can see that the inside of this box is filled with the upper portion of the ceiling hitbox. And once again, this upper portion is inaccessible since there's no way to enter the box. Try to go downwards, the floor snaps you back up. If you try to enter going sideways, the wall pushes you back out. And if you try to enter going upwards, the ceiling cancels your movement and cuts short your upwards trajectory. So in this case, the box keeps you out, and so you'd never normally be inside of it interacting with the upper ceiling hitbox. One other note, see that the triangle box is
Hey! Come on out! Incoming with sword from Shadow. Sign here, please! Wings of darkness! Away I go! Cut to the chase!
Specifically, the ceiling on the other side of the cup. So now we're eventually stuck. The ceiling cancels any movement I try to do. It won't let me jump up either. Separately, here's what it looks like to enter a ceiling hitbox in the air. Mario just falls straight down, since any sideways movement is cancelled. And so there, we actually did touch the upper region of the ceiling hitbox, because we entered above the ceiling of the tunnel. So anyway, now we know the hitboxes of the three types of triangles, but there's one other hitbox that's also a which is out of now the term out of bounds can mean different things depending on the context. Like, a person might say that getting right here is out of bounds, because this isn't somewhere that you're intended to go in the course. But that's not what we mean in this case. See, it's a useful way to define out of bounds is any point in space where there's no floor triangle. So if our entire course was just this one floor triangle, then all of this area would be out of bounds. So that's everything inside of the triangle.
Oz, reveal thyself! Gotta
As you wish, Malfoy.
With sword comes Shadow. Don't blink! By royal decree!
So it only does the vertical. So unlike ceilings, this happens for both upwards and each jump up against that. That is the short for this trajectory. And finally, if Mario's in water and tries to enter out of bounds, then its movement just gets cancelled. It's not a normal place where this happens in the game, but if you flip into the tunnel in Wet Dry World, like we did earlier, then you'll fall into the tunnel after it'll leave. So because of that, the town section of the level isn't loaded, and so you can swim into the end of the tunnel. This is swimming into out of bounds, so Mario's movement gets cancelled, he just ends up swimming in place. So the reason Mario's not able to jump off of courses like Bob on Battlefield is he can't move into out of bounds. There's no actual wall triangle edges of these courses keeping
I create.
the courses with death. So the reason you can jump off of these courses is because the death barrier itself is made up of floor triangles. Here's a zoomed out whole course. So you can see that the death barrier is made up of two giant floor triangles called main particles. Here's a side view of two courses. So Cool Mountain is a death barrier, while Lava Battlefield plus the death barrier is a safe haven all around the course, making that area habitable. So that's why Cool Mountain
Oz, reveal thyself! Come on out! Sign here, please! Shadow Raven! Cut to the chase! Incoming! By royal decree! Don't blink! Speed of light! Hey! Don't blink!
But also what is happening is Mario stops having his hat on, hit it back, and spawn. Now everyone always wonders, why is going out of bounds when Mario puts his hat? Well, let me explain. See, Mario's logic every frame is like this. First, it resets his hat state, so in the state of having no hat, then it lets Mario use action, like say, walking forward, and finally, it updates his hat state to be how it's supposed to be, which gives him his hat again. So his hat will be on by the time he hits record. So that's what normally happens every frame. But between steps 1 and 2, there's a check. Specifically, it checks if Mario's at the bounds, and if so, then we're done with the function and go through the rest of the steps. So let's say Mario's currently at the bounds, and now let's walk through the steps to see what happens. First, it resets his hat state, which makes him have no hat, and the check ends the whole function since Mario's at the bounds. So we never even get to step 3, where it puts his hat back on, so we just see Mario have his hat. In other words, we're seeing the intermediate state of things that we're normally supposed to see. So anyway, now we know the 4 types of hitboxes: floors, walls, ceilings, and data bounds. Now you may have noticed that there's a bit of a similarity with walls, ceilings, and data bounds, because they all basically block Mario's horizontal. So let's do a side-by-side comparison. On the left, we'll have Mario interact with the wall hitbox. In the center, we'll have Mario interact with the ceiling hitbox. And on the right, we'll have Mario interact with the bounds. Just to clarify the ceiling, there weren't any ceilings that were developed in this visual. We did find one. See, in the castle foyer, behind this door. After this long jump, then use one speed to behind the upstairs ski door. Now opening that door area, so by clipping behind it, we end up in this sort of fake area that you're not meant to be in. There's not many surface triangles here, despite what the visuals do. So that means we can go to the edge of the floor and push directly on the ceiling hitbox, specifically the ceiling of the hallway below that has the movement. So I just wanted to clarify that. And now let's compare the 3 cases. If Mario just walks forwards, then in all 3 cases he stays in place doing the pushing animation. Here's a diagram from above. See, the wall hitbox lets him go into it and then pushes him back out, which makes him be flush with the hitbox. But the ceiling and out of bounds hitboxes just cancel.
I'm all for work-life balance, but I think this is pushing it.
But now watch what happens if we try pushing at an angle instead of head-on. In all cases, we put sidestepping animation, but in the ceiling and out of bounds cases, we still push, but now at an angle. See, the wall hitbox lets you enter the hitbox at an angle, then pushes you out perpendicularly, which lets you move along the edge of the hitbox. But the ceiling and out of bounds hitboxes still just cancel the movement, so you don't end up moving along their edges. So to recap so far, the pushing animation isn't actually specific to walls. It can happen for ceilings and out of bounds too, though the sidestepping animation is specific to walls. Now let's see what happens when we jump into these 3 hitboxes. For the wall and out of bounds, the jump goes all the way up, but in the ceiling case, the jump goes nowhere, because like I mentioned earlier, ceiling hitboxes cut short your upwards trajectory. So in this case, Mario doesn't even leave the ground, he just lands instantly. So in our bullet points, let's add that ceilings are the only one that cancel your upward speed. Just to keep the bullet points lined up, let's add that out of bounds is the only one that kills you. Now let's see what happens if we jump into them. Don't push them until the downwards portion of the trajectory. All 3 cases, Mario's forwards move blocked, and so he just falls down in place. So just like with the ground's movement, the wall lets Mario move into his hitbox and then pushes it back out, while the ceiling and out of bounds cancel them altogether. That's just for jumping at a slow speed. If instead Mario jumps into the hitboxes moving at a medium speed, cases does a soft fall. Now in the start particles, Mario stays upright. So let's add that to our notes. And if he jumps into the hitboxes moving at a fast speed, or during certain other actions, like the value slide. In 3 cases, he does a hard fall, which has start particles. Mario falls off his feet. So let's also add that. But now listen to the sound of each fall. See, when you walk on a cylinder at a bounce, it's a sort of sound effect, while the ball doesn't. So let's add that to our notes too. So overall, you can see that the 3 pieces are pretty similar. I'll let you finish on that.
Incoming! Hey!
So it's easy to see why walls and ceilings. Someone might see Mario pushing if he's pushing on a wall, but actually pushing on out of bounds. And someone might see Mario fall on a wall, actually walk on the ceiling. So keep in mind how 3 types of hitboxes are. Now we're almost ready to get to multiple goals, but there's still one more topic first, which is positional units. For example, here I'm showing Mario's position on screen, so you can see his x-coordinate, y-coordinate, and z-coordinate. Each coordinate represents how far along Mario is on the corresponding axis. The x-axis goes east and west, where it needs to be in the opposite direction. Y-axis goes up and down, up, possibly. Z-axis goes south, south.
Make my escape. I'm out of here.
If we zoom in, we can
No rest for the wicked.
Speed of light.
Now we're going to analyze what surface triangles looks like at this scale. I mean, surface triangles are usually bigger than this, but we're going to be looking at some pretty tiny triangles for now, just so that we can see how certain properties work. Now, as you know, a surface triangle has 3 vertices, but what you may not know is that these 3 vertices have to have integer coordinates. In other words, the vertices always lie at the intersection of a horizontal unit line and a vertical unit line. So a triangle might look like this, or like this, or like this, but it would never look like this because here the vertices aren't at integer coordinates.
Hey.
The reason for this restriction,
Coming through.
triangle vertices
By royal decree.
short is a very
Can't catch me.
only have integer values.
Speed of light.
And 32,767. So it's impossible for text to have a value. So now let's consider this question. Where you stand on this
Midnight Phantasmagoria. With sword comes shadow.
Explained by filling out this little table. So Mario himself is
The wrong test subject.
coordinates are stored as floats. Floats are another variable. They basically store real numbers, like numbers that can have decimal components. For example, let's say Mario's at x-coordinate 1.34 and z-coordinate -2.79. But that's not the point that the game checks to see whether it's within the floor triangle or not. Instead, the game first converts those values to another thing. Specifically, it converts the coordinates to shorts, and then that's the point that the game checks to see whether it's within the floor triangle or not. It's like I mentioned earlier, shorts can only have integer values, meaning no decimal components. So to convert Mario's coordinates from floats to shorts, the game takes the coordinates and chops off the decimal
What's in here?
so
Maybe
it's
a
not
growth
rounded,
serum?
it's truncated. So to summarize, even though Mario's at 1.34 and -2.79, the floor detection function first truncates those values to 1, -2, and then checks that the position is within the floor triangle or not. Why does it do that? I guess the programmers thought the calculation would work out shorts instead of floats, since floats would have slight
Not
rounding
bad,
errors.
as far as treasure is
Let me show
concerned.
this on the grid using the same numbers. So Mario's here at x-coordinate 1.4 and z-coordinate -2.79. I'll also add a highlight to Mario's current unit square to make it easier to track. And then for the floor detection point, start at Mario's position, but then we have to truncate the decimal components. So for x-coordinate 1.34 becomes 1, meaning we go to the left edge of Mario's unit square, and for the z-coordinate, -2.79 becomes -2, meaning we go to the bottom edge of the unit square. So in general, the floor detection point will always be on the corner of Mario's unit square closest to the origin, and that directly follows from the
Everything's
fact
ready.
that when
Let's go.
the number's decimal component, the number will only get closer to 0. So now if we move Mario around in a continuous way, we can see that the floor detection point moves around in a discrete way. And in all 4 quadrants, the floor detection point is still what's on the corner of Mario's unit square closest to the origin. On the other hand, Mario moves around in a square, and the floor detection point doesn't even move. In other words, all the positions within a unit square use the same floor detection point, because all their positions truncate to that same corner closest to
What
the
do you
origin.
think, cutie?
Consequently, the corner closest to the origin as the representative for the whole unit square. So whatever floor status the representative point has will be the floor status for all the points within the unit square. So if the representative point is a floor, then the whole unit square is
Oh, brilliant!
if the representative point is a square,
You're in for a little shock.
spoiler from the picture.
Come a little closer.
Then the whole unit square is considered the ceiling. I'll demonstrate this principle with the floor triangle from earlier. We're trying to figure out where Mario can stand on this triangle, and I said it was not just the area inside the triangle. So let's look at some points near the triangle's edge. If Mario's within this unit square, this is the floor detection point, aka the representative point for the whole unit square. Representative point is not within the floor triangle, so it may be gray to indicate no floor. I'll also put a little arrow from the representative point to the unit square, just so that there's no confusion about which unit square it's the representative of. And note that because the representative point is always on the corner of the unit square closest to the origin, the the arrow pointing from the representative point to the unit square will always be facing away from the origin. But anyway, since the representative point is gray to indicate no floor, we can color the whole unit square gray to indicate no floor. So even if Mario is here, inside the point,
Time to shine!
still count to be outside the
Strike a
triangle.
pose!
Barbados, guide us.
Let's go!
On the other hand, Mario is unit square. This is the representative point. This time, the representative point is within the floor triangle, so I'll make it blue to indicate floor. And then I'll put the arrow again. And now, since the representative point is blue to indicate floor, we can color the whole unit square to indicate floor. So even if Mario were here, which looks like it's outside the floor triangle, it would still count as being inside the triangle, since this whole unit square is considered inside the triangle. So going back to the whole triangle, the simplest way to determine where Mario can stand on it is the following process. First, mark all integer points that are within the triangle, including on the triangle bounds. Then put the arrows facing away from the origin to indicate which unit squares are being represented. And finally, fill in those unit squares. And so now, we can see the exact area where Mario can stand on this triangle. So the floor detection area isn't a perfect triangle, but more like a pixelated approximation of a triangle. And because it's pixelated, we get some interesting properties. For example, the edge of a floor triangle is partially aligned, exactly horizontal or exactly vertical, then the edge of the floor detection area will be a straight line. More specifically, if it's an edge that faces towards the origin, then the floor detection edge will coincide with the triangle edge. And if it's an edge that faces away from the origin, then the floor detection edge will be 1 unit offset from the triangle edge. On the other hand, if the triangle's edge is not cardinally aligned, like it's on a diagonal, then the floor
Feeling
detection
alright
edge will be
today.
jagged.
I'll take the chance to try to get some more done than usual.
It's in exactly the same way as floor detection, since it also converts Mario's coordinates to shorts. So all the insight we just gained about floors also applies to ceilings, like what the representative points and how the ceiling detection area is really just a pixelated approximation of the ceiling triangle. And before we move on, I have one more note about the representative points. So in general, an integer point is the representative for just 1 unit square, which is the unit square away from the origin. But for integer points on the x-axis and z-axis, they're each the representative for 2 unit squares, and the origin itself is the representative
I'll lead the way.
for 4 unit squares. So I just wanted to clarify that. And so now, we're finally ready to start talking about invisible walls and what they are. But how can we answer what they are without knowing what they are? In other words, what do we even mean when we say invisible walls? How should we define them? Because we can't find examples of them to analyze unless we know what actually qualifies as an invisible wall. So let's break it down. The term invisible wall has 2 parts to it, visible and wall. To satisfy being invisible, you just have to not be able to see it. For example, this would count as an invisible wall because I don't see anything there. However, this would not count as an invisible wall because I can clearly see the wall there. And then to satisfy being a wall, you'd think I'd say it has to be a wall. But think about it. A casual player can't see specific triangles in their classifications. Instead, a casual player would just go by what it seems like it's happening. After all, they say if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck, right? So if we apply that principle here, and say, push on it like a wall and walk on it like a wall, it's a wall. At least it would seem that way to a casual player. So based on all that, our definition of invisible walls will be any space
The fuck was that, a JoJo reference?
but has no visible texture. Now remember our discussion from earlier? We established that walls, ceilings, and data
Spontaneous science is the world's greatest!
So really, an instance of any one of these 3 hitboxes could be
As they say in the dub.
wall, so long as there's no texture associated with it. Now, surface triangles usually have textures, so a wall could only count as an invisible wall if the programmers didn't put a texture for it. A ceiling could count as an invisible wall if you hit its upper hitbox, since that's so far away from the ceiling texture that it would just seem like a separate thing that's invisible. And then out of bounds would always count as an invisible wall. It's a hitbox with no surface triangles, so it has no textures. So those are the 3 things that you count as invisible walls. From there, I've further broken it down into 8 causes of invisible walls. 3 of them are pretty straightforward, 4 of them are a little more involved, and the last one, well, let's just say it's the final boss of the causes.
I wish I had a sand.
Think about them like this, 8 moves in a row. We're instead going to think about them like this, with 4 items on the left, all separate, and 4 items on the right,
I would have just
2x2 table, like a Punnett square. So I basically created the periodic table of elements, but for invisible walls. And we're going to spend the rest of the video filling it out. But for each cause, I'll explain how it works, and we'll look at examples. So, let's dive into the first cause of invisible walls, which has to do with wall triangles. See, most wall triangles have a texture, but surface triangles and graphics triangles are completely separate things in the game. Surface triangles have hitboxes that affect Mario, talked about, and graphics triangles are purely visual. Now, for the most part, the programmers made it so that every surface triangle has a corresponding graphics triangle. There are some exceptions, and so if there's a wall triangle with no corresponding texture, then that will count as an invisible wall.
Take it.
So let's look at some examples.
Go
In the
on.
hallway leading up to Bowser in the Dark World, there's an invisible wall right after the trap door. Obviously, it was put there because this whole hallway is a trap and you're not actually meant to get to the end. Then in Tiny Huge Island, there's an invisible
Where the
wall
hell
of
is
water
this?
all along the edge of the course. So this is a rare case when there actually is a wall at the edge of the course instead of just out of bounds. Now if you remember, when you swim in out of bounds, Mario's movement gets cancelled, and so you're just kind of stuck there until you turn all the way around. The programmers obviously didn't like that behavior, so they added a wall here so that you can swim along the edge instead of getting stuck. Because remember, walls let you move along them, but out of bounds cancels your movement. And note that this wall is also present in the tiny version of the island. Then in the slided Tall Mountain, there's an invisible wall in the shape of a little rectangle at the top of the end of the first tunnel. So you might be wondering why that's there. Well, based on footage of the game's beta, you can actually conclude that this is a remnant of a left turn sign that used to be in that spot. It's kind of blurry, but it's there already. So that means at some point, the programmers removed the graphics for the left turn sign, but accidentally left in the collision. Also in the Tall Mountain slide, if you head the wrong way and go down the dead-end path, you see that they put a big invisible wall here. This is so that you can't fall off from here and land on a later part of the slide. Instead, they wanted you to plummet to your death. But since now we can see the exact edges of this big wall, we can actually just navigate around it and land on the later part of the slide anyway. In fact, here I've landed on the part after the loading zone, so the rest of the slide is escape loading. And so if I continue ahead, I just fall off and die. Then in Big Boo's Haunt, there's an invisible wall above the center of the merry-go-round. It's like a little column sticking right out of the pyramid. See, the camera in this room is normally situated right in the center above the pyramid, and they wanted to prevent you from going through that spot since that caused the camera to turn really suddenly. But if we use hacks to remove that invisible wall column, you can see exactly what they were trying to prevent. See, different little frames, which probably here it is. Bowser in the Fire Sea, there are some invisible walls right after the funnel at the end. These were put there so that you don't accidentally jump over the funnel and fall down, because then you basically have to redo the whole level. But also, there are some invisible walls under the funnel to make sure you can't touch the ending trigger from the side. And finally, in Wong's Fortress, there's actually a big invisible wall right up the course. So why they put this one here? Well, it actually has to do with the water that's in the level. Let me give you a quick rundown of the water. So here's the side view of a surface of water. Note that I'm making it purple because blue is already taken by floors. So there are two important things to understand about water. First, the hitbox of water extends from the water surface to infinitely downwards. Like, they never programmed water hitboxes to have a bottom. And second, whenever Mario enters a water hitbox, his height gets set to just under the water surface and he goes into the swimming action. Now normally, you wouldn't notice the height change because you're only meant to enter water hitboxes from the top, which means you'll already be near the water surface when your height gets set to near the water surface. So in most cases, this height change doesn't have a very noticeable effect, but there are some ways to enter water from the side, in which case you can clip upward to the water surface. For example, in Tall Mountain, you can clip through this wall into the water behind it. And from there, if you go forwards, you can enter the hitbox of the water higher up in the level, causing you to upward to that water. And similarly, in Tiny Huge Island, you can clip into the mountain, upward to the top of the water that's in the mountain. So going back to Wong's Fortress, the reason for this invisible wall is to prevent you from entering the water hitbox from the side. But they made a little oversight because to the right of this invisible wall is a gap. So you actually can enter the water hitbox after all and get the upward, which makes for a nice party trip. In fact, you can say to your friends, I bet you $10 I can jump off the edge and survive. Easy way to make money. So yeah, that's the first cause of invisible walls, which we're going to call wall with no texture. Now let's look at the second cause, which has to do with ceilings. Remember, I said ceilings usually come from two points, the top of the room or the bottom of the structure. I also said that the upper part of a ceiling hitbox is so far away from the ceiling texture that it just seems like its own separate hitbox that's invisible. So in these two cases, that would be above the enclosed room and inside the enclosed structure. These two areas are meant to be out of reach, but there are ways to interact with them. How is interacting with the invisible wall? So let's look at some examples, starting with getting above rooms. Like we saw earlier, in Wet Dry World, he's chucked a clip into the space above the tunnel, which is an upper ceiling hitbox. If we bonk in there, our angle actually gets reflected every frame, because when Mario's in the bonk action, it's programmed to reflect off of ceilings and out of bounds. Since here, Mario's surrounded by ceiling hitbox, he just gets continuously reflected, which looks pretty silly. In Easy Makes Cave, it's actually possible to glitch this moving platform out of bounds, and so then let the platform move out from under Mario to the end.
Boring!
So
Isn't there anything else more interesting to
it has a
do?
lawyer, like we saw earlier, clip inside this pillar, and so then you're able to push on the ceiling hitbox of the area below. You know, the area with the stairs that go down to the basement. It's also like we saw.
What a pleasant surprise! Truly an extra slice of joy.
Above the hallway. Now let's look at getting inside structures. Jolly Roger Bay, it's possible to clip inside the floating ship. Its whole inside is ceiling hitbox. And in Rainbow Ride, we can use a Bob-omb to clip inside one of these glass blocks. And of course, their whole inside is ceiling hitbox too. So those are some examples of getting above inside an enclosed structure. But there's a third case that and that's if we have something that should be an enclosed structure, but doesn't have a floor on it. In that case, the ceiling hitbox will just continue to propagate upwards unimpeded. In theory, this should never happen in the game, but does it? Well, in the Tall Mountain slide, we have these three arches. The background white so that it's easier to see. So let's look at the first arch. On its underside, we have some ceiling triangles, and on the top side, we have some floor triangles. So no problems here. But now let's look at the second arch. On the bottom, we have some ceiling triangles, and on the top,
I wish I could interview whoever left this stuff here.
The programmers just didn't put in. So that means the ceiling hitbox isn't covered by any floors, and so it just propagates upwards without anything to contain it. And what about the third arch? On the bottom, we have some ceiling triangles, and on the top, there are once again no floor triangles. So on this arch too, the ceiling hitbox just leaks out into the space above. And so basically, if you've ever tried to jump over the second or third arch, you'll have found that you're unable to, because Mario just bonks on the ceiling hitboxes. We call these exposed ceiling hitboxes, because unlike normal ones that are contained, these ones are just right
Ad Astra Abyssosque.
Welcome to the fourth case for ceilings, which is a ceiling that's all by itself. Not the top of a room, not the bottom of an enclosed structure, but just a ceiling in isolation. Hitbox would also propagate unimpeded. Surely the programmers never did that, right? Well,
thank you for
Mountain, we have this bridge near the Rainbow Star.
Ad Astra
At the end of the bridge are these two flaps on the sides. These were clearly meant to be walls, but they're actually ceilings since they're angled slightly downwards. And because the programmers didn't expect these surfaces to be ceilings, they didn't put any floors to cover them. So the ceiling hitboxes just rise upwards without anything to stop them. Meaning that this is another case of exposed ceiling hitboxes. So watch out if you're ever playing around near these two flaps. So yeah, that's the second cause of invisible walls, which we're going to call above ceiling, below any floor. Because if there's no floor above the ceiling, then the whole area above the ceiling is vulnerable. If there is a floor above the ceiling, then only the area between them is vulnerable. So now let's look at the third cause, which has to do with out of bounds. If you remember from earlier, all courses are surrounded by out of bounds, even if they have a death barrier. And that out of bounds is an invisible hitbox that you can bonk on, so it counts as an invisible wall. So if the course doesn't have a death barrier, then the out of bounds area will just be on the edge of the ground. And if the course does have a death barrier, the out of bounds area will be at the edge of the death barrier, which you can reach if you jump far enough. So that's the third cause of invisible walls, which we're going to call out of bounds on course edge. And so those are the first three causes, which I said were invisible walls. That's because they directly correspond to the three hitboxes we talked about earlier: walls, ceilings, and out of bounds. So think of these three causes as the simple, basic implementations of those three hitboxes. The remaining causes are more advanced implementations, so let's get to those ones now by next looking at the Punnett square. Specifically, let's look at the fourth cause. Like I said, these causes are more complex, so instead of me saying the cause outright, we're going to build up to it with examples so that we get some intuition. So imagine a structure like this. It's a staircase.
Oh, it's revealed!
Now let's look at this structure from above. Not just like this, but also on
Speed of light!
so there's a
Nowhere to
rectangle on
hide.
the bottom representing the lower step, and the rectangle on the top representing the upper
Here,
step.
please!
Now I
As you wish, me.
Ninjutsu!
First, before a rectangle, it's just two color triangles together that form a rectangle.
With sword comes shadow!
On the triangle level, but it's simpler if you're up the triangle rectangles. Analyze the situation on the rectangle level. So that's what we're going to do. And second, even though we're looking at the same shape on the left and the right, they're at different scales. The 3D shape on the left is at a normal scale that you find hundreds of units wide, while the shape on the right is scaled down to be really tiny, like less than 10 units wide. I made it really tiny so that it's easier to see individually. So, for example, if we rotate the two shapes, the one on the left will stay with the one on
By
the right.
royal decree!
Remember,
And away I go! Cut to the chase!
and then scale. Now on the right side, the structure looks like a rectangle.
Press delivery!
On the left side, the structure
Shadow
also
Raven!
looks like
Let
a
night
rectangle. So, the structure from the side
Speed of light! With sword comes shadow!
causes a force on both sides of the edge of the piece. So on one side of the scene, we're edge at the bottom of the pole, which is the north edge of the lower step. On the other side of the scene, we have the lower edge at the top of the pole, which is the south edge of the upper step. The question we're going to be analyzing is, are there any gaps between these two edges on the unit grid? And in this case, the answer is no, there are no gaps. The lower step's edge and the upper step's edge are exactly flush because they have the same lateral coordinates, so there are no gaps between them. Now if the floors were separated like this, then there would be a gap. But for now,
Oh, it's revealed!
structure back to the top down. Now we're going to see if that causes any gaps.
Incoming! Cut to the chase!
Coordinates to remain exact. So for example, at this
Not here, please!
As you wish, main toilet.
I'm out of here!
exact same pattern.
Speed of light! Hey!
Let's rotate the structure back when we started.
Nowhere to hide!
The structure itself. You see that upper step?
No shit.
Run from.
So again, let's think about the edges that make up the seam between the lower step and the upper
See
step.
that, Bart?
Or in other
No
words,
shit.
the edges at the bottom of the wall versus the edges at the top of the wall. This time, that would be the north edge of the lower step, the south edge of the upper left step, and the south edge of the upper right step. Same question, are there any gaps between them on the unit grid? The answer is no, but the reasoning is a little different this time, because now there aren't just two edges with the same lateral coordinates. Instead, there are three edges, a long edge and two short edges. And notice that the two short edges connect at a point that lies exactly on the bigger edge. Because of that, we're going to call that point edge vertex. In general, we'll define an edge vertex as a triangle vertex that's intended to lie laterally on another triangle's edge. So it's not meant to coincide with the other triangle's vertices, but instead be somewhere in the middle of the triangle's edge. And it doesn't have to lie exactly on the edge, but just be intended to lie on the edge. So in theory, this biology. Now going back to the structure, see that the edge vertex here does lie exactly on the bigger edge. Because of that, there are no gaps between the bigger edge and the two smaller edges. In the 3D view on the left, that means that this edge vertex is laterally aligned with this edge. And just to clarify, finding the edge vertex here or here, it doesn't really matter, because those 2 points are basically guaranteed to line up with each other. So laterally, they're like the same point. So going forward, we'll consider them to be the same edge vertex, and I'll only be marking one of them. Okay, so let's clear all of that, put the structure back to a top-down view. Now let's rotate. This time, you may notice something funky is going on with the edge vertex on the unit grid. So let's stop it here. And now, same question. Are there any gaps between the edges?
Come on, enough
Interesting.
procrastinating.
In this
Let's
case,
go.
there is a gap. And that's because the edge vertex is no longer exactly on the lower edge. That's how could it be? Because remember, triangle vertices must have integer coordinates, but there are no integer coordinates that lie exactly on the lower edge. Earlier, when the structure was part of the it was easy to find an integer coordinate exactly on the edge, because the edge went through so many. But now, since we're at a weird angle, edge doesn't go through any integer coordinates, and so it's literally impossible for the edge vertex to lie in the edge. Instead, it just has to pick integer coordinates that are close to the edge. That means there are two cases. One, the edge vertex overshoots and causes the floors to overlap. Floors overlapping like this is perfectly fine and won't cause any invisible walls. And then case 2, let's undershoots and causes a gap. And the gap and we have some problems.
By royal decree! With sword comes shadow.
Instead, we have our little process for figuring that out. So let's do that again. First, we mark all the integer points that are within the floor or on
Speed of
the
light!
mount.
Hey!
Then add the arrows. Finally, the lid
Another test pick.
Now you can see the integer are inside it.
I got carried.
Consequently, there's not considered to be one. Instead, all them are floor gaps. So basically, every structure that resembles this could have floor gaps. Instead of this, it could look like this, or like this, or like this. It doesn't take very much. You just need a seam between floors, usually with a wall in it, and for the floor edges on either side of the seam to be subdivided differently. That causes there to be an edge vertex, which as we discussed, is a vertex meant to lie on another triangle's edge, specifically a triangle on the other side of the seam. But if the structure is at a weird angle, then the edge vertex might be misaligned from its edge, causing there to be floor gaps. So to recap, we looked at 4 scenarios, whether there was no edge vertex or there was an edge vertex, and whether the structure was cardinally aligned at a weird angle. Only when there was an edge vertex at a weird angle did we get floor gaps. So those are the 2 main ingredients. Now I think it would also be useful to look at floor gaps from the side. So let's take this structure, put it sideways, and now take the cross-section of the steps. And to make this easier to work with, I'm going to make the wall a little taller and extend the floors. Now, as we saw in the previous demonstration, there's some geometry that can cause these 2 points to be misaligned, meaning that the wall triangle can end up slanted. So what we're going to do here is look at 5 different alignments of the upper point in order to examine 5 different slants of the wall triangle. The 5 slants are leaning very far back, leaning a little back, perfectly vertical, leaning a little forwards, and leaning very far forwards. We're going to see which ones cause there to be floor gaps and what happens in those cases. So let's start with perfectly vertical. In this case, the 2 floors are exactly flush. Now for each case, we're going to see what happens when we show the added bounds area. So first let's add the floor hitboxes, and then let's let the added bounds area propagate upwards to see where it fills. In this case, the floors cover all of the added bounds, which means all the area above is habitable. So I'll give this case a happy face. Then next, let's look at leaning very far back. Interestingly, when the wall triangle is this slanted, it actually gets classified as a ceiling. And this happens in the game. There are triangles that are meant to be walls, but are just a little too slanted, so they're actually ceilings. For example, in Pool Mountain, there's this ceiling. So even though it looks like a wall, you can't kick on it or do any other wall interactions with it. And then in Rainbow Ride, there's this ceiling. It's meant to be part of the big house's wall, but because it's just a little too slanted, it's actually a ceiling. So we'll call these wall-like ceilings, because they're ceilings that look like walls and are meant to be walls. So going back to our demonstration, let's see what happens when we show the hitboxes again. Like before, the floors still cover all of the added bounds. In fact, we have some floor overlap, so there's floor to spare. So this case gets a happy face. Then next, let's look at
yes, the floor is made out of floor.
The wall triangle is still a wall, just a slightly leaning wall. If we show the hitboxes again, see that the floors still cover all of the added bounds. It's a happy face. One big caveat here is that the sequel is not clear. In reality, walls can only tilt about this much while still being a wall.
Steady as stone, as a good knight should.
Together. So with individuals, we're just going to pretend that the walls are this much and still be a wall. Then next, let's skip ahead. Very hard. Now the wall triangle is so slanted the other way that it is classified as a floor.
Someone needs to scramble apart.
For example, Lava Battlefield, the side of the first step has a very triangle is meant to be a wall, but because it's a floor, all that is a slide on it.
Leave it all to me. Time to clean up.
Bridge is a floor triangle. Bowser in the Fire Sea, the side of the platform has a floor triangle. And in the castle courtyard, the side of the structure has a floor triangle. So for these ones, we'll call them wall-like floors. But what effects does this have in our demonstration? Well, first let's show the floor boxes. You can see that the original two floors are separated, but luckily this new floor covers the area in between. So if we show the out-of-bounds area, you can see that the three floors together cover all of the out-of-bounds.
I see everything! The Temple of Wisdom!
And then finally, let's look at
Oh, it's revealed! Let the magic
here.
begin!
The wall triangle is still a wall, but it's like eating.
Cut to the chase!
Show the floor boxes.
Hey!
The original floors that were separated. Now there's no third floor to cover the area. All we have is a wall there, but walls don't cover at the
Hey! Midnight Phantasmagoria!
It doesn't actually have
Incoming!
power.
With sword comes shadow!
So show the
Hey!
see that tiny sliver
Be amazed!
and that
I
sliver
see everything!
down.
Surely light!
This
By
type
royal
of
decree!
wall is called the light.
Speed of light!
Here, think about this kind of
Cut to the chase!
wall compared to the previous three pauses that we looked at. These three pauses are
Don't blink! Hey!
walls with the texture. Those are put there intentionally.
This may hurt a little.
Go to, so they don't really get in the way when you're going to place
Incoming.
For the ceiling boxes, those are mainly just above rooms and inside enclosed structures, which are places that you don't normally interact with. Well, aside from the arches, the tall mountain slide, and the bridge flaps in Cool Mountain, those ones can get in your way. And then for added balance on the court's edge, you know where those are, and it's not like they're in the way because they're only on the edges of the course. But for this most recent type of invisible wall, it's just in the middle of the course out in the open.
Strike a pose! Let the world collide!
Like this wall that it has nowhere right between.
Delicate as silk!
Along with the rest that we're going to cover on the subsets that are revealed.
I must leave no stone unturned as a dutiful maid will.
So I'm going to give this case an angry face. So the summer goes with 5 possible slants of a wall triangle, and there'll be a wall that's leaning slightly forward, which causes there to be a floor gap that looks at the mountain.
Showering you praise! Time to shine!
It's only a very narrow range, so that's the end of bounds. Basically, the wall triangle has to be leaning forward so that there's a gap between the lower
Leave it all to me, as a good night
The wall
should.
can't be leaning too far forward, or else it acts as a floor that covers that gap. Now, it is also useful to see these 5 pieces are like the compound view. When the wall leans very far back, the floors overlap. You can tell because the overlap area is an extra dark shade of blue. When the wall leans a little back, it's still a floor, but a bit smaller area. When the wall's perfectly vertical, the floor overlap perfectly.
Step on up!
The whole thing is just a uniform shade of blue.
Let the magic begin! Speed of light! Nowhere to hide!
There's the light.
Everyone hold hands! Make yourselves at home!
That doesn't
Midnight
And
Phantasmagoria.
finally,
Over here!
very far forward, the wall physical floor, which covers it. So yeah, only the one piece that causes floor
Speed of
gaps.
light!
But
Hey! Cut to the
interestingly,
chase!
floor gaps don't necessarily cause invisible walls. There are actually 3 pieces
Don't blink.
of what effect the floor gap has. It depends on what's below the floor gap. Piece 1 is the floor below the floor gap. In this case, Mario can completely jump over the
Speed
floor
of light.
gap and not hit any invisible walls. He can also go into the floor gap and fall through to the floor below, assuming there are no wall deposits.
Sharing my
In
knowledge!
case 2, there are no floor
Midnight Phantasma!
gap. Like the
Surprise.
small section ago, this lets a tiny sliver back down to the earth. If Mario jumps into that
Nowhere to
sliver
hide.
along, it walks into it and push. And then case 3, there's a ceiling below.
This may hurt a little.
The ceiling has
Oh,
a
it's
lower
revealed
box,
thyself.
so you don't care about that. It's the upper box that causes the tiny
What a-
sliver of ceiling to be hurt. So this would also count as the exposed ceiling hitbox. And just like the sliver of the bounce, the sliver of ceiling lets us walk on it and lets us push on it. So it's only case 2 and case 3 that cause
Shut
invisible
up,
walls.
bro. Yo,
If you ever
instead.
encounter an invisible wall like this, it might not be obvious whether it's from out of bounds